MGTOW man, welcome back. So I've been prompted to look specifically at this verse many times, a couple verses actually, probably 4 or 5 different emails I think in the past couple of months. The verses Ecclesiastes or the passages are Ecclesiastes 7:27 through 28. I've never really directly talked about it, partly because it's so well known, especially amongst those that are watching some of these videos. And I don't always like talking about the things that are super well known. And there also are a number of videos that I have made that touch on similar things, from Proverbs 31, the adulterous wife, Samson and Delilah, David and Michal. You know how it goes. So as always, I look at Redpill passages from the Bible every Sunday and comment on them. And I'm no theologian, I'm no expert, no. But as a part of what I like to do on this channel, it's combining my interest in MGTOW, Red Pills, and the Bible. So let's cut to the chase and read some of these emails and then read obviously the verses first, 7:27 through 28. Behold, this is what I found, and Salomon was the writer of this. Says the preacher, while adding one thing to another to find the scheme of things, which my soul has sought repeatedly, but I have not found. One man among 1,000 I found, but a woman among all these I have not found. See, this alone I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. Here are some of the emails that I've received about this, and the expectation is that, look, there are no Nawalts. A Nawalt was more likely then, but look, there are still no Nawalts. No matter what, no matter how far and wide I've looked, you can't find that virtuous woman. And back in January, I received this one. Men don't need women besides having children. There are no Nawalts. Check out this Bible scripture. Basically, there needs to be some context as well that goes along with this. And another email that I got reflects the first one. Everyone familiar with King Solomon knows he was famous for his wisdom, great wealth, and hundreds of wives. There was also a thing that this was a time where if unicorns ever existed, aka the Nawalt, they were more likely to be found. Do you think wise King Solomon was saying that all women are like that? One thing I want to interject here is that while a Nawalt would have theoretically been more plausible at the time, the main thing is that feminist ideas were not widespread. Technology hadn't proliferated, and men held and were responsible for holding positions of importance in society. Also, they were not emasculated and aimed to be removed from most of the societies. Obviously, there probably were microcultures that did in some way reflect what we're seeing now. But that, what I said right there about men holding positions of importance in society, there was somewhat of a balance in what men and women would offer in life. Thus, women having more to occupy them, whether this is serving in the home, cooking, cleaning, washing clothes, doing some foraging maybe, rearing more children and tending for them, nannying for others in the community, they had a value that they wanted to continue to foster in those areas that helped them keep a relative balance in need, and it kept men and women's minds out of hypergamy and instead daily survival and working as a unit. What we see now are soap operas to fill those same hours. It's always important to understand that both the time spent per day for both men and women doing things that were meant to keep them just surviving, that was part of what kept this idea that Nawalts were more common then. It was more like a lifestyle was much different. Not that I'm interested in harping on what needs to be said to bring things back to balance, as this was certainly no utopia, but it's not just about character in men and women at the time. It's about life constraints, style of life, innovation, health, and social structure. One thing I want to say is that this is a very commonly known verse. It's also known that Solomon was a player among all players. He was a king in David's line, having a temple built. Men already had their choice of women at the time, but Solomon especially would have more. I'm going to read some more of Ecclesiastes 7:14 through 27 to give a little bit of background. This segment is artificially titled as the contrast of wisdom and folly, which is important to note that different divisions in the Bible, these subheadings are not actually there organically, but rather have been added to break up reading and create more of an understandable index. This chapter in specific is about vanity. It's about searching and not finding. So in the day of prosperity, be joyful. In the day of adversity, consider God has made the one as well as the other, so that men may not find out anything that will be after him. In my vain life, I have seen everything. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, And there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing. Be not overly righteous. Do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Be not overly wicked, neither be a fool. Why should you die before your time? Basically, he's saying balance. It is good that you should take hold of this, and from that withhold not your hand, for the one who fears God shall come out from both of them. Wisdom gives strength to the wise man more than 10 rulers who are in a city. Surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. Do not take to heart all the things that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. Your heart knows that many times you yourself have cursed others. All this I have tested by wisdom. I said I will be wise, but it was far from me. That which has been is far off and deep, very deep. Who can find it out? I turned my heart to know and to search out and to seek wisdom in the scheme of things, and to know the wickedness of folly and the foolishness that is madness. And I find something more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is snares and nets, and whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. Behold, this is what I found, says the preacher, while adding one thing to another to find the scheme of things. And this goes on to say what we just read, which my soul has sought repeatedly, but I have not found. One man among 1,000 I found, but a woman among all these I have not found. Imagine a man in Solomon's youth saying these things. Would you expect to hear them? Especially in regards to what he is saying about searching for women. And obviously this man had an insatiable sexual appetite. That is clear. The likes of Wilt Chamberlain in the Bible. But look at what he says. The woman whose heart is snares and nets and whose hands are fetters. There is something more bitter than death. And for this to be said at the time, and for this to be said by royalty, it's often labeled as being misogynistic, as Paul is labeled as being misogynistic, as Peter is labeled as being misogynistic. 1 Kings 11:3 notes that Solomon had 700 wives and about 300 concubines. Kings were not the initial intent of Israel, hence the period of judges in Israel's history. Saul was the first king, and this was warned. The issue that Solomon is bringing up is vanity, its lust, and its worldly possessions, and the inability for it to satisfy. So I'm going to call out simps too by this. And we see he was warned not to pursue this, especially as a king. In Deuteronomy 17:14-20, we get, he must not acquire many horses, he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away. It's marked that Solomon's heart turned away because of this pursuit. Solomon writes Ecclesiastes as a reflection on these things. So Ecclesiastes is a reflective thing, something that you would not see from a young man, especially his remarks made about women. He's reflecting on his life. Vanity, all is vanity, is one of the famous lines in Ecclesiastes. And more truth comes out when testosterone goes low later in life, especially in regard to how men and women interact. A man is able to think with his big head at that point. And I'm calling out the simps as well, as I said. The message of the day that many men internalize is if they have access to women, if they have the hypergamy stunters, if they have cars, horses, a nice home, the palaces that he lived in, money, all the gold and silver he had, and women, all the wives and concubines he had, then he will have arrived. One of the things that a MGTOW man is realizing is that these vanities exist in a cyclical nature. You get one and it creates another problem potentially, or it brings you into a more perilous situation. The vanities that we consume not only produce a greater internal incentive to pursue other vanities, but the vanities consume each other. By pursuing vanity, you open yourself up to more of it, and you create a perspective of life that is bleaker, one that is wished to be simpler, actually. You begin to look for another high. And in that, you bring yourself also to a crossroads. Solomon had the success that he had, but he did not wield it in a way that brought him freedom. And that's the thing I brought up before. The more that you're able to create hypergamy vampires, that means you can bring yourself into bondage, the more that you're also likely able to create freedom in your life. But you are at a fork in the road. Which one will you take? The crossroads with hypergamy that I've always brought up is if you're wealthy and you have life agility, you have a greater disparity between the forks that you could choose. If you have those things, you can also create extreme bondage. The nature of man and the nature of women they've not changed. The only thing that has changed is the environment around them. One fork is extreme freedom due to the freedom that you generated. The other thing is bondage created also by your wealth. And with that wealth, he had the option to choose from any women in the land. He did. He was not satisfied. So I'm calling out the simps as well, the ones that are always pursuing and saying that is where a man will be satisfied in his youth. How do we know that he won't regret it later? as Solomon did, because although they don't have Solomon clout, what they do have is the ability to choose from that same fork in life, regardless of the amount of wealth that you have, being able to go into extreme freedom or extreme bondage, and you dictate whether or not your life is steered by the women or not. The POA life does not satisfy. I don't care what is preached. That is my view. And what Solomon, sure, there are no Nawalts, only humans. There are no soulmates, and you should no longer keep on the search of the Nawalt, as time and life will pass you by. In my view, there are no Nawalts then, but Solomon would have had endless access to keep the hypergamy vampires at bay. And another thing is, the women will imitate the man, the character that he brings out. And if Solomon did not dictate the direction of the collective character, then they would not either. And I have not come across an in-depth explanation of the difference between his discovery of a venerable man versus no venerable women. One popular one that I've heard is that it is a prophecy of the Messiah, although with it said in a reflective nature, I cannot say it with great confidence. So you don't need Solomon to break the news about Nawalts. The nature of man, the nature of women here specifically has not changed. The only thing that has changed is the environment around us. Give your suggestions about this. Feel free to add to it as well. sunrisehoodie@gmail.com, Sunrise Hoodie on Twitter. Hoodies up, man. Hoodies out.